This is the Enjoyer Podcast. I'm your host, James Dixon.
You may have heard by now that Joe Biden, our president, has pardoned his son, Hunter Biden, for various crimes between 2014 and 2024. So this covers a good chunk of the Biden vice presidency and his entire presidency. My take is one you probably won't hear elsewhere, because journalists in cities like D.C. aren't free to tell the truth. Look, as I broadcast, I'm wearing a polo and podcasting in my mom's basement. I ain't rich, but Lord, I'm free. Freer to tell you the truth than the repeaters who wear suits, herd into the White House briefing room, and wait to be spoon-fed the same info at the same time and pretend they're doing real work. That herd is compromised by two things. One, they need access, and two, they have a hive mind. So it matters to members of the herd that other members of the herd like them, that sources like them. So what separates me is I don't need anything from these people. I don't want anything from these people. It's why I can tell you the truth about all of them. Here's the truth. Joe Biden has done more to weaken America and its institutions than anyone in American history. These last 3 years have been the first time the American government was turned against the American people. Not against Confederates who claimed they were starting a new nation, but against fellow citizens who believe the same creed and country. So, in retrospect, now that the Biden era is ending, 2021 to 2025 will be remembered as America's trial subscription to communism. By the grace of God, we remembered to cancel it before it renewed. From the outside in, the Biden years might have looked like nonsense. But then I read Joshua Lisec's book, Unhumans, and it made perfect sense. Lisec co-wrote the book with Jack Posobiec. Unhumans tells the secret history of communist revolutions and how to crush them. Joshua is my guest today, and he's going to light the path as we talk about the tactics of the unhuman. What I find disturbing, though, is how many of these themes played out in the Biden era. But first, a quick diversion, if I might. I've seen a talking point. I have a pretty smart timeline on Twitter. I don't have a ton of people. I find it's tough to grow when you emphasize smarts, when you actually want to have a good conversation with these people. There ain't many of them. And I find myself disappointed by the timeline. I saw so many people talking about, well, how could you be surprised that Biden would pardon his son? How could you be surprised? Don't you know that that's how politics works? This is an attempt to paint yourself as savvy and not shocked. Oh, you've seen it all before, haven't you? You just know it all. Nothing shocks you. Nothing gets to you, does it? But that's not our job. Our job as citizens is to demand and enforce a standard that Joe Biden fell far short of. So maybe your problem is that you're not surprised enough. Maybe you need to get surprised. Maybe you shouldn't take it as a normal thing that America's ruling family is a crime family. Maybe you not being surprised is actually how we got here. Now back to the podcast. In Unhumans, Joshua writes, to understand why Unhumans do what they do, understand their frame. Anti-civilization. In my reading, Joe Biden is the ultimate unhuman of American history. And to understand why he did what he did, understand his frame. Anti-America. Everything Biden has done in his 4 years has weakened America, its people, and its institutions. The purpose of a system is what it does. The purpose of the Democrat Party that elevated Biden is to destabilize and weaken America, to erase our heroes and our history, to throw our Constitution in the trash because Michelle Obama didn't write it personally. Let's just look at the sweep of history here. In the 1860s and prior, the Democrats were the slavery party in America. Since the 1970s, they've been the party of abortion. At every turn, Democrats reject and subvert the beautiful and the true, and they elevate the ugly and the untrue. Democrats are the unhuman party. This is what they do. So here's some highlights of the Biden years. Just going to run through it real quickly. Let me know in the comments if I missed any. And Joshua, please let me know if I missed any in your reading of history. So Joe Biden ran a basement campaign and yet somehow came up with 81 million votes. Or is it 81 billion? Is it 81 trillion? Which number do I need to cite to not get this page taken off YouTube? I forget the number. Sergey, if you could send me the number, I'll say that one. Let's just go with 81 trillion just to be safe. Well, we now know that we can say definitively, not guessing, that the 2020 election was stolen. See, the problem was always you didn't have the proof. The 2000, that didn't happen, okay? 2,000 mules didn't happen. Here's what we do know. America was denied the truth of the Hunter Biden laptop in the weeks before the election. Had America had the information that was true, that was published by my old shop, the New York Post, they would have seen the character of the Biden family and they would have voted for Trump. So the truth always comes out in the end. And if the truth hasn't come out, it's not the end. Biden threw open the southern border. He invited millions of Julios down to your kid's schoolyard. This overruns schools, housing, social services, budgets. These people are treated like princelings while you struggle to pay rent. They call this heightening the contradictions. Biden also opened up another border. He invited boys into your girl's bathroom and men to the women's medal stand in sports. Because as Joshua writes, to divide is to conquer. Biden prosecuted a president, Donald Trump. He oversaw a system that debanked the president's wife and son, along with many others in tech and crypto. The only reason nobody spoke up is because the alternatives are worse. He oversaw a system that pushed fast adoption of the EV, knowing damn well it's actually common knowledge in that world that the faster you go, the more you hurt Detroit and the more you help China. This is common knowledge. If I know it, Joe Biden knows it, his advisors know it, and he did it anyway. Biden deplatformed his critics. He denied them a voice on the public square, even using the FBI to go around to social media companies and say, take down this account, take down that account. He treated concerned mothers like Tiffany Justice, one of our friends, as terrorists. Cities were allowed to burn, but moms who raised their voice at a school board meeting could expect to hear from the FBI? Biden created the first political prisoners we've had since the Confederates. The January 6ers were treated like Confederate soldiers while George Floyd was valorized. You were told to stay home and stay safe. George Floyd had 8 different funerals. I kid you not, 8 funerals. Look it up. Biden cut off our domestic energy production while buying gas from Venezuela. Lisec and Posobiec wrote 2 bangers this year, actually, Unhumans and Bulletproof. Bulletproof is the first investigative report that was ever published on the July 13th shooting of Donald Trump. We learn more from Lisec and Posobiec than we have from our own government about what happened to our president that day. But today we talk about how to spot and to defeat the Unhumans. In January, we're going to have Joshua back to talk about the events of July 13th, where if Trump hadn't survived that, I don't know what we'd be talking about today. I don't know that we'd be talking today. I don't know what the future would hold today had that gone another way. So I asked a question over this weekend. Joshua, thank you for coming to the podcast. I asked a question this weekend. I said, what is the left's single greatest strength? But you'd actually already given your answer in Unhumans. Organization. How'd they get there?
Thanks for having me on, James. The way that organization works with the left is they first have, of course, the instigator, the shot caller. So in the Russian Revolution, of course, this is Vladimir Lenin. We like to think of them as the chief unhuman, that person who is most envious of the success of his betters, the one person who wants to see it all burn to the ground and be the one to light the match and add the fuel and be there after it is in ruin, to remake that crater, that crusty crater, into his own image. Now, we call the book Unhumans because Unhumans is first and foremost a verb, and it means to deprive someone of their dignity as a human being. And it makes sense that what you do to others, you become that yourself. So
Yes.
if you do a little accounting, well, then you're an accountant. If, like me, you do ghostwriting for nonfiction authors, well, that makes me a ghostwriter. And if you typically make a habit of unhumaning good and normal people in your society, then guess exactly what you are. You are unhuman. And of course, what
Malcolm X
communists
talked about
do,
this. The hater becomes, right. Like you end up, the hate that you have for others ends up consuming you.
exactly, yes. And so what we notice is in communist revolutions, those that are in the streets and full of great bloodshed and mayhem, as well as those that are an irregular revolution, like what Jack and I posit we have been witnessing in the United States since the 1950s and 60s, an irregular gray zone communist revolution that has gone just under the radar of the
Oh yeah,
official narrative for most
yeah.
people. And it's only been the so-called conspiracy theorists over decades past who've been aware of this, like John the Baptist, a lone voice crying out in the wilderness, sort of an Alex Jones type of figure in biblical days, if you think about it. It's been those voices that have been calling this out and have been cast aside or pushed outside of the Overton window. I think also Pat Buchanan going back to the 1990s. He was all over this. Ron Paul in the early 2000s. People that when you mention their name, you just roll their eyes. Most people would.
Right,
Most polite and
right.
normal people. Whereas now, what Jack and I did is we saw that Overton window and we decided to break the window and then tear out the entire wall that the window was in, and talking about
Yes,
communism over the last
yes.
250 years. Now, the reason organization is its tactic is they need a show of force. If it's one figure or if it's just a demagogue, they're not going to get very far because they need power. And there's power in numbers. And there's a lot of power in a large number of people who are very, very angry and are not thinking for themselves. So Steve Saylor coined this term, by the way, which is the coalition of the fringes. And this is how every communist uprising, revolution, or movement
Right.
begins. Whether it calls itself communist or socialist or progressive or left wing, regardless of what its label is, right? So what we notice is that unhuman activity is chameleon-like in that it looks at, okay, what's popular on the left right now? Because that, and we'll explain why it's always a left-wing movement, unhuman activity. It looks at what's popular right now. I'm going to go and call myself that. Okay, it's right now. It's the Soviet groups. Okay, well, we're a Soviet movement. Soviet referring to councils of workers and turn of the century Russia. Ultimately, Soviet Union. That's what it was. It was a union of these workers' councils, where Vladimir Lenin began talking to the underemployed, the unemployed, the overworked laborers who were not having a good time in Russia. Many of them had lost a father, a brother to a war that Russia was involved in that did not go poorly, and it was seen as merely advancing the Tsar's ego and personal business interests. So this is what they do. They first look for people who are on the outside of society, the dregs, you might say. To use a more polite term, one that Jesus did in the Gospels, the least of these.
Right.
That's where unhuman activity first takes place. This instigator comes up with an inspiring message for that underclass of people, be they ex-cons, be they unemployed, be they anyone that is deemed oppressed. And this is why it's always a left wing. Oppressed versus oppressor.
Right.
The haves and the have-nots. There's the rich and the poor. Like, this is the left-wing binary thinking and mindset, right? This is almost Bernie Sanders' speech.
Right.
Almost. Now, what's different is, okay, we need socialism. There was, in fact, and have been, in the midst of communist revolutions in the past, socialist movements for making things better. Like, for example, socialists and progressives in the early 20th century America pushed an income tax. And that's how we got that here in the States in 1912. And in turn of the century Russia, there was a group of socialists called Mensheviks. They believed in a entirely peaceful transition.
That's what Bernie sounds like.
Yes, he would be a Menshevik. But then there are communists. There are Bolsheviks. There's no, we're going to take what we want.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to break the law by becoming the law. And so we have seen a lot of that over the last 60 to 70 years in the United States. And all they need is a message that is unassailable, a moral high ground that calls to everyone. And so for Vladimir Lenin, that message was peace, land, bread in English. So that's what Russia had been struggling with. And the underclass bore the worst consequences of that in Russia. And we could talk about Spain, we could talk about China, we could talk about Central America, because the pattern is the same. And this is what we assert in Unhumans, that there is a template for a violent left-wing revolution, either one that's out in the open or one that happens quietly and then all at once, like we've seen happen in the United States. Fortunately, its days appears to be numbered, at least at the federal institutional level, and then culturally making some progress and unrolling, or rolling back some of those victories in the communist culture war that we've been seeing since the 60s and 70s.
I think this is an important point to understand. Whether it's Occupy Wall Street in 2012, Black Lives Matter 2014, feminists in pink hats in 2017, Black people raising fists in 2020, whether it's the rainbow or the trans movement, these are all communist movements because, as you write, to divide is to conquer.
Yes, it is a form in the United States. What we witnessed was cultural Marxism. This is what we call it, and other people call this as well, because communism, Marxism, the Communist Manifesto, for the most part, is primarily an economic and secondarily a cultural and social criticism set and then policy recommendation framework, where there are haves and have-nots. There is an aristocracy and there's an underclass. There's no middle class, and there's no way for you to work your way up and out of it. That was true in the old world, not in the new world. One of the reasons we did not suffer a communist revolution in the United States was the great men of history like John Patterson, who comes from my hometown of Dayton, Ohio, by the way, like a local legend. Everything is named after Patterson. Even the first Army Air Base is named after John Patterson. It's Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. The inventor of the airplane, Orville and Wilbur Wright, and then John Patterson.
Yeah. You guys
John
love
Patterson
to talk about that. The Wright brothers.
Completely changed how laborers labored in the United States from the 1800s and the early 1900s. That's the Gilded Age that was known for society. Even as a working class person, you saw us go from, if you can walk there or ride a horse there, you can get there. As an adult, as coming of age, to trains, planes, and automobiles. If you had candles and kerosene, you could read at night, to the world is electrified and there are appliances in your house to do a housewife's 12-hour labor in a few hours automatically.
Right.
You saw that transition occur in your lifetime during the Gilded Age.
Yeah.
And of course, there was a significant amount of manufacturing that went into this, right? And even from raising food to early supermarkets and canneries and convenience foods occurring. Society changed completely during the Gilded Age. And one of the reasons why we witnessed this, of course, was tariffs. But that's another conversation. But what we saw with John Patterson was he believed that workers were human beings and ought to be treated like it. So things like sunlight, proper ventilation, heating, a rudimentary heating and cooling system so it wouldn't get too hot or too cold, proper clothing, nutritious meals, family time, having a social environment that provided for additional education, literacy, all of these things for his employees And he was laughed out of Europe for recommending these for his workforce because they're just workers. Why would you treat them like people? Right? That's the old world mindset that there was great resistance to. And then when they noticed that, they started losing here in America. If you had the European mindset, you were losing your workers to John Patterson and his factories. Now he was the owner of NCR, the National Cash Register Company, and he had other companies and he did business with as well. But NCR was one of the biggest companies in the world at that time, and with his reach and his connections, he was a regular in high society, and ultimately trained 1/4 of all salespeople in the world went through an NCR sales training program. That's a lot. This guy had
like the Alexander the Great of sales. Like that's.
I think you could put it that way. Yes, and it was about embodying Christian principles in business. He was a very devout Christian man, and he believed that the least of these were still human beings with human needs and desires and dreams. And in his memoirs, which is fantastic, it's called I think it's called The Father of American Salesmanship. Excellent read. In his memoir, he writes, speaking hypothetically to other businessmen like himself, and I'm paraphrasing, if you want to avoid a communist revolution, treat your workers like people who will never become communists. Paraphrasing it, because he saw what was happening in Europe and how owners of factories, managers were being kidnapped and tortured to death by workers that they themselves had abused and bullied, and then governments going up in flames. And it wasn't just in Russia. Communist revolutions were happening during the Industrial Revolution everywhere. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were writing the Communist Revolution in response to the Industrial Revolution. And what they believed was the alienation of humans from human life. So first of all, you take dad out of the house and put him in a factory for 16 hours a day, 7 days a week or 6 days a week. You take mom, get her out of the house, have her work somewhere dark and dingy as well and dangerous. Take the kids out and either put them in a factory or put them in some sort of a boarding school house situation so they don't see each other. Get the family out of the house, get them off of their land and stick them in the squalor of an inner city. And you completely alienate humanity from itself. This is the problem that the Communist Revolution was being, or the Communist Manifesto rather, was being written in response to. These ideas did not come up out of nowhere. So I think both conservative centrists and even socially aware liberals, everybody across the aisle can understand that there was a real problem set that initially communism was being written as a solution for. But this is a situation where the cure is worse than the disease by far. And John Patterson figured it out. If you treat people like people, they don't need to organize against you because they're happy, they're well-fed, they're taken care of. There is a ladder to climb to reach their dreams. And America uniquely offered those economic opportunities. So communists and those who hated the United States and Western civilization and Christianity specifically, bringing communism to the United States, it just didn't catch on because like anyone can become something here. You could be an illiterate immigrant who doesn't speak English and in 5 years you're a millionaire. Or
it's so funny
equivalent.
that you cite Patterson, and I have to look into Patterson because that's absolutely fascinating because I'm up here in Michigan. What I hear is Henry Ford.
Yes.
Now, ultimately, Ford Motor Company lost the battle with unionization, and that opened the door for all this. Now we're not even a right-to-work state anymore, so we have a union president who stands in the way of Michigan's hope of rebuilding its auto industry. We're all jacked up now, but what Henry Ford was trying to do was exactly that, was if I pay you that good wage, you won't need to join a union. You won't want to join a union, and because you'll know you're being taken care of. It's something Trump said in the 2020 campaign. Success will bring us together. And to me, a Henry Ford, a John Patterson, held off communism for 100 years in this country. Because people with second homes who can send their kids to college don't fall for the revolution. It's now when you see everything messed up and people are unemployed and on drugs and this malaise has set in. Now it seems like people are open to communism because they feel like they're losers.
That's right. Yes. So in the interwar period of the 20s and 30s, followed by the post-war period from 50s and into the sort of the sexual revolution of the 60s, and also as well as the civil rights era. And we talk about that as well in the book, where communism mutated into a cultural phenomenon. And this is where the culture war actually comes from. So first, it's not about economic communism, it's social communism, it's cultural Marxism, where there's groups that have a real or imagined grievance against an oppressor group or class or caste. So this is the feminist movement, specifically first wave feminism. This is the civil rights movement. This is the sexual revolution and sort of the free love culture of the late 1960s and the anti-war, anti-tradition, anti-government, anti-Christian messaging that was ubiquitous at that time, followed by you have issues associated with abortion, and then with gay people in the 80s and the AIDS, whatnot, and then into the 90s.
Environmentalism.
And so and then once again with Occupy Wall Street, within a couple of years, was completely replaced by the LGBTQIA plus, however many letters are in there now, the sort of QWERTY keyboard collection of identity groups, where that's what it is now. So it's not about your cultural status or your economic status, rather, your socioeconomic class. It's about your identity, your intersectional identity, and how many grievance credits you get, and the oppressor versus oppressed narrative. That's a uniquely left-wing phenomenon. And what it is it's communism turned cultural, so that the similar methods of a communist uprising can be deployed to upturn an existing civilization in a world of tradition to advance your own interest, and use individuals that you claim to want to protect, that you claim to want to help, use them and leave them worse off afterwards. We use the image of the classical Greek image of the Ouroboros, of the snake that devours its own tail. And that is left-wing activism. That's left-wing movements. That's left-wing politics. That's socialism. That's communism, where it eats itself ultimately. Now, it devours everybody else in the way first, and then it ultimately eats itself. So if you look at any group that the left has used to advance cultural Marxism and the oppressor versus oppressed narrative, there's not a single one I can think of that is better off after having been used by left-wing radicals than they were before. And that's a tough assertion, but I really can't think of one, James. Can you?
You know, I think about that meme, right? That was like, oh, see, we had Occupy Wall Street, and that got people scared. And then they turned it into LGBT and Black Lives Matter. Like, no. Occupy Wall Street's not separate and apart from that. It's all. Now, what I do find interesting is something you said. I've never quite had the words for it exactly, but I do feel that the left has traded the cultural Marxism, like they've given up on the economic stuff almost. I think about a union boss, Walter Reuther. The 696 freeway is named after the guy. Walter Reuther wanted you to get more of Henry Ford's money. That's his whole point of being there, was that you would be able to, you'd benefit from the work you did with your hands. Awesome. Now we have Sean Fain, who wants a May 1st, 2028 general strike. They're more interested in the cultural Marxism. They're not trying to put more food on your table anymore. They want to burn it all down and to lower standards of living across the board.
Exactly. There's this insistence on equality. In the French Revolution, equality was one of the, together with equality, liberty, and fraternity, was one of the principles. Right? It's the same thing. Peace, land, bread. Like who would ever disagree with that? Right? I
Black
think
Lives
also,
Matter.
Yes, Black Lives Matter. Women's reproductive rights. Women's reproductive
Safe,
rights.
legal, and rare. I mean, it is. Man, why is it always a 3-worder?
Yeah, I think it's because of the rule of 3 is part of the human experience of something that feels complete.
Right.
That's why the Western Christian and also Eastern Christian understanding of the creator of reality itself is as a triune persona. Of the Trinity, because it is a sense of completion, right? Also, father, mother, and child, the Holy Family, right?
3-act structure. I mean, it is our whole thing is really built around that.
Exactly.
Triangles in building are the most stable structures. Like it's kind of fascinating.
Exactly. Yes. It's not complete until there's 3. Think about that. And so what communists do is they like to look at what works and then steal it for themselves. And organizing people around an inspiring message certainly does work. The 3 branches of government, right? We can look at, we can look at anything and everything, and we find that there's a rule of 3 being obeyed somewhere. And then sometimes it's 9, 27, 81, with that same principle again, but it repeats multiplicatively. So coming back to the unhuman activity we've observed that you pointed out in the outset, right? What the left did very well first in the Bolshevik Revolution, the Russian Revolution, and this comes back to Lenin's propaganda period. It's called the friend-enemy distinction. That there's no principles beyond power, and the only way to get power is to reward your friends and punish your enemies. There's no law, there's no principles, there's no morality, there's no ethics, there's only power. Because the unhuman has been, in many cases, so kept outside of a system of excellence and merit where their efforts are allowed to be rewarded, that they have become so consumed with hatred and bitterness. And now here's the issue. In many cases, it's real. The grievance is real.
Right.
Vladimir Lenin's older brother, his role model and hero, was arrested and executed by the Tsar in the 1890s. This is a man with a bone to pick with the Tsar, and he got his revenge.
Wow.
And oftentimes, this is what it's about. It's about revenge against something that's real or imagined. So John Patterson said, hey, take away the reason to get revenge and they won't want to kill you.
Yes.
They won't want to burn your factory down.
Yes, take away. And so, we talked organization, right? That is their greatest greatness, the left. It's just like, when I watch Ohio State, they're good at some stuff. Like, you have to be able to take the blinders off of who you'd prefer to win and say, okay, this is what the other team's actually good at. And they appear to be on code. And I would have said that was their strength. You write that the left stands ready for total war. They're committed to absolute victory. When I asked that question on Twitter, a lot of people cited their solidarity, their blue no matter who mentality. Did we see a crack in that foundation this year? Doesn't the fact that the candidate was switched out indicate a gap in the wall of solidarity? Because if it was blue no matter who, they would have just supported Biden. And if there's a gap, how do we widen it?
That is a good point. Yes. So ironically, Biden might have done better than Kamala did, which is hilarious. But the powers that be ran a palace coup against Biden because his mental condition was so poor that they couldn't hide it anymore, and they felt ashamed and they felt embarrassed. And that's how you widen cracks, by the way, is shame, is causing them to feel ashamed of themselves, very publicly, very loudly, very continuously.
Yes.
We point out in chapter 12 of Unhumans, we call it the Unhumans' bane, is laughter, humor, mockery, humiliation, pointing, staring, laughing, and gathering all your friends around. And so the fact that they could no longer deceive the world as to Biden's mental and physical state due to the debate, we believe that their first thought was, well, can we just take out the other guy? Then July 13th in Butler, Pennsylvania, 6:11 Eastern time. Okay, well, that didn't work. Okay, get rid of him. And then, 8 days later, 9 calendar days later, swap him out, get him out. Now, to this day, we don't know who it was that posted that letter to Joe Biden's X account. Nor do we know who it was that put out his immediate endorsement of Kamala Harris afterwards with a photo.
No letterhead. No, I mean, I've never seen anything like it.
Yeah, we still don't know who it
the
was.
Hunter Biden pardon that came out yesterday looked to be more of an official White House document than what Biden wrote when he dropped out of the race.
That's right. And even with that one, did Jill do that one? Is there a record of him signing it, or is it just once again another another document that's released under his name without him having any obvious, transparent participation in.
I believe that that's actually what happened, is that they tweeted it. By the time he found out, what the hell is he going to do? Say I was taking a nap until 7 p.m. and I didn't see it? Like, what are you going to do?
And
There's
and
nothing
also,
you could have said that would make you sound like you should still be president after that.
exactly. Yes, there's nothing that you can say. Oh, what if someone on one of Kamala's aides posted my withdrawing from the race to my account and I didn't mean it? What's more embarrassing?
Right.
What's more embarrassing? And that, by the way, is often how these things are played. And they will choose what's less embarrassing. What's less embarrassing is to roll with it and pretend it was real.
Yeah.
Then one of someone's a rogue employee got access to the president's account, and then we wonder, how do we live in a society where a rogue employee's aide has access to the president's account? We did 25th Amendment him immediately. So like that's where that line of reasoning goes.
Yes.
So like, what's more embarrassing versus what's less embarrassing?
Bingo.
What's
He
less
was dealt a
embarrassing is
situation.
pretending
He
it
had to
was
live
real.
with it. That's exactly it. Act as if. Hey, act as if it's real. This is kind of something we just touched on. You wrote that for as long as there's been civilizations, there's been forces opposed to it, and these are the anti-civilizationists. And this is that Henry Ford theory, right? That because there was a middle class, there could not be communism. Is not the antidote to communism to create a culture of winning, to find some way to pull the many loser men that we encounter on our timelines or on our streets out of the muck and show them a better way?
It certainly is, yes. And it's extending ladders down to the willing to do so.
Yeah.
So it's not about free stuff.
Right.
That's what socialists and communists always promise, though,
Right.
to the coalition of the fringes. More free stuff, and we're taking it from the rich and giving it to you because they exploited you. Like that doesn't work. That falls into the frame of the resentment, of the envy, and of the desire for revenge, and it stokes it and makes it even more powerful. It doesn't solve any actual real world
Because
problem.
if the gambit just worked, you've been given reason to think it would work again if you continued complaining.
Exactly. So what we want actually instead are real opportunities for those who are motivated by real unfairness, let's say, or even just their dreams. It could be a negative reason or it could be a positive. It could be escaping pain or it could be pursuit of pleasure, pursuit of happiness, like, right? Life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness. That is the American way.
Right.
That if you're willing to follow the laws and follow the rules, you can make yourself into something.
Yes.
There was an English writer who, upon witnessing the surrender of Lord Cornwallis to General Washington's forces in Yorktown in 1781, wrote about the victorious Americans, many of them volunteers and certainly looked like it. And this Englishman wrote that he said that they were farmers, they were lawyers, they were soldiers and sailors, there were laborers, craftsmen, blacksmiths, there were English, they were Scottish, they were Irish and black, there were Native Americans. But he described all of them, despite their difference in appearances. He said that they all were a new race of men.
Yeah.
The American race. And I believe that was the first time that had been codified, and talk about an extreme circumstance of witnessing that. It's the new world versus the old world.
Right.
And the American story has been 250 years almost of as many ladders to as many people as possible. Because when you bring the old world into the new, unfortunately, it's going to bring traditions and customs that are best left into the past.
Right.
And it's taken a while for different groups to experience ladders, let's say, of opportunity extended down to them. But when they have been extended, people have taken the opportunity. Now, unfortunately, grievance, real or imagined, or hypnotizing people into believing that it's real, and that you're still being discriminated against, you're still having stuff taken from you.
Mhm.
Those people who are opposed to you, they're oppressing you. They have because they took from you, and that sort of a victim of mindset, victim of narrative, it is still very attractive, even though it's not commensurate with reality. It's unfortunate, but the more opportunities there are to make yourself successful,
Yeah.
the fewer restrictions there are, the less bureaucratic red tape and nonsense there are, the easier it is for more people to start with nothing or less than nothing and make something of themselves. And it's then a situation where people aren't surrounded by entirely sentiment of they took from us, we have a grievance, screw them, where's our stuff? But rather, well, he made it and she made it and he did something and she did something. So it's a sort of positive peer pressure
Right.
where fitting in is to claim a grievance or to just be a hedonistic pleasure seeker because nothing you do is going to change anything, versus make something of yourself and pursue your dreams. And the cultural shift, the vibe following the victory of Donald J. Trump is in that direction, where
Right.
anyone can make their life great again. Is the experience that is now being mass distributed to the people. Even if nothing or few things change, and maybe the Department of Government Efficiency doesn't cut what they ultimately hope to cut, it's a psychology situation where the world is persuaded into, well, there's opportunities now, so I'm going to start looking for them.
Yes.
So the mind's reticular activating system of collective humanity has been activated.
It's like driving. Where you look is where you go. I was talking about this on the Thanksgiving episode with my friend here, Justin Barclay, a radio guy in West Michigan, and saying, what if third graders, instead of making these little privileged hierarchies about, oh, that guy is better off than me because he's white, and that guy is more better off than me because he's rich, what if everyone had to talk about how they are blessed
Yes.
and whatever unfair advantage they have, and forced to think about it that way, because where you look is where you go. And I just think so many of our kids have been steered wrong, which is why they walk wrong.
Exactly. Yes. And a singular focus on what have you been blessed with, and even that using that use of that religious language, it bestows a gratitude and a natural humility that enables you to be great. There's a colloquialism in our culture: "He who's kneels before God can stand before anyone."
Yes.
We've heard that before,
Yes.
and that's a true confidence because you know who you are, and you know what you're made of, and you also know what your limits are, what you might fall prey to, what you might naturally be tempted towards that you need to guard against and exercise discipline with. And you also then become aware not of shortcomings and things that would cause you to experience grievance, but rather looking for opportunities that are aligned with what you know you're made of. And I think I threaded the needle well. In 2017, I gave my TED Talk in which I talked about,
Yeah.
this is kind of like a few years after Occupy Wall Street had finished its course. And it was half a how-to guide for micro entrepreneurship, half why we got into a world in which that's your only hope. is to make your own American dream. And then the subtitle of the TED Talk was "Create Your Dream Job from Scratch."
Mm.
Now the idea was no one's giving you a ladder. Fortunately, there are ladder building materials and instructions for you. Here is a sampling of them. Let's get started.
Yes.
And that sort of self-motivated, self-starter attitude, that is uniquely American. So while I don't think that America will fall to a typical communist revolution, we've certainly suffered for decades within the irregular revolution that's taken a cultural Marxist twist rather than a socioeconomic one. Although there has been progressive income taxation, extreme property taxes, the whittling away of parental rights, for example, and all of these things were recommended in the Communist Manifesto. But the goal there was to create a culture opposed to the old ways, like the family, like inheritance, like legacy, those things that were seen as of, by, and for the rich. Whereas in this country, we saw, no, family is for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
Family is everything. And unfortunately, that part of communism, classical communism, true Marxism, did get transported over here and has made an issue. But if we're to reverse the declining fertility rate, I think there's great hope in creating opportunity. There was an inspiring post I saw from someone today in which she pointed out that men who are filled with hope begin working out.
Mm-hmm.
Men who work out regularly and make themselves better in terms of their economic situation, creating better opportunities for themselves, are going to look better. They're going to be better. They're going to inspire girls and women and the ladies to follow in that, becoming more healthy, becoming more beautiful, more traditional, let's say. And that will solve the fertility crisis in 20 years or less. Right. And so we find ourselves, I think, placing proper responsibility on men under 40 to fix this. And I think that's the only group that can. And I think anyone in that group who says, well, that's not fair. Okay, communist. Right. This is America. Life's not fair. Suck it up and solve your problem.
I think Willie Beeman said it perfectly on Any Given Sunday. Life ain't fair, and fair ain't what I'm here for. You write that to divide is to conquer. What can people do in their everyday lives? A lot of people are listening to this and saying, I got a persuasion genius here on the podcast. What can you do to fight back against the division, against the demographic games? And the conservative side is as guilty of this as anyone. Oh, we had the first Indian trans IT director. We got the first non-black head of the FBI. I actually found an unearthed letter from MLK saying he hoped someday a brother from India would be the one to surveil him rather than these 6'2" white guys. So, hey, I'm sure he'd be thrilled with Kash Patel. How do we get out of that frame, which is inherently leftist?
Yes, it is really focused on identity, intersectional identity over anything else. Now, the thing to think about is that is an anti-Christian perspective. So
yes,
we're witnessing a resurgence in faith that's unlike any we've seen before. There have been revivals in the past and these so-called great awakenings in the past, but they were largely emotional and emotion-driven, and a little bit of mass hysteria in some of them as well. Like in the Jesus movement in the 1980s, where the rapture is happening any day now. And, the credit cards are the mark of the beast, which was a real thing, by the way, that many people actually believed. Y2K is the second coming, this sort of thing that people were saying.
Well, they didn't have the jab back then, so they hadn't seen the real one, you know?
Oh, yeah, the COVID-19, right. That's right, yeah. But what we're seeing is a return to a traditional religion. So we're seeing younger people going to Roman Catholic Mass, to traditional Latin Mass and Roman Rite. We're seeing people, particularly young men, visiting Eastern Orthodox churches as well. We're seeing that swing to, you remember how it was always, I'm not religious, I'm spiritual.
Absolutely.
We had that twist, right? Now we're seeing, I don't want to be spiritual, I want to be religious.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly in young men, like men under 40, men under 30. I've done a few videos about this and pointed this out as well. Yes, women under 30, we are seeing feminism and leftism and liberalism and progressivism and those ideas taking their share of women from the generation.
Right.
But what we're noticing also is that women who are conservative are extremely conservative.
Yes.
Far more conservative than millennial, Gen X,
right,
and even baby boomer conservatives, like grandma. Her conservative granddaughter is more conservative than she is. So true is grandpa's grandson over there, more conservative than he is. So we're seeing a return to tradition in that sense, you might say. I think that will be helpful. And I think the reason why is we're not a social experiment. Chesterton's fences is a popular metaphor that's being used. This idea that if you come upon a fence on your property, don't remove the fence until you know why it was built in the first place. And you think about the sexual revolution and birth control technologies. These are not things that our species is designed, developed, or evolved for.
No.
And alignment with nature is the overall movement that's part of this, or that's driving this, rather. It's everything from blue light blockers to women tracking their cycle instead of using birth control technologies. It's instead of looking for a church that feels good, no, it's what is a church that's going to make me feel guilty for doing things I should feel guilty for and wronging other people. It's getting up with sunrise. It's getting, it's listening to Andrew Huberman's podcast. It is praying the rosary every day. It is focusing on what similarities you have with people. It is working out. It is looking for what microplastics might be in your containers and getting rid of them, and only cooking your food in glass or stainless steel. And then wait a second, is there a non-stick coating spray on these things that I'm cooking my stuff in? It's not using plastic to put your water into. It's only using BPA-free and preservative-free products into your house. It's organic and non-GMO. It's not taking certain injectables or having your kids take them. It's not circumcising your infant sons. It is not subjecting your kids to daycare if you can help it. It's homeschooling your kids. Like all of these things that I'm describing, it is a return to nature.
Yes.
It is renaturalizing humanity.
All of those are responses to this modern world we've made with all these creature comforts. Hey, you don't have to to stick around and hang out with your kids all day. Send them off to daycare. You could have a job too, Mom. What you didn't know is that stuff was not being done for you. School is not being done for you. It's being done to you. You out of the home, Mom and Dad both out of the home, and now they can divorce any time they want, any moment they want, a reason or no reason if they want. So who does that leave alone and unprotected while Mom heals and gets that messed up haircut? The kid.
Yeah.
The kid. And, that's why you see the rise of the trans movement, because our families were decimated. So they won the war on men, unquestionably. They won the war on women because women thought they were winning the war on men, not realizing you can't kill your better half without killing yourself too. And who does that leave alone? Our children.
100%. The sort of war on men, I think that's, as a cultural phenomenon, that's real. I also think that it was a generational phase, and that it's not over because there's a new generation coming up that just doesn't care.
Yeah,
and that's what
kids...
I love about healthy masculine young men who are coming up. There's no sense of wokeness whatsoever.
They're hyper resistant.
I can't say that word. Like, I'm gonna make sure that there's no one here that's gonna hear that and then they whisper it or whatever.
Right.
It's just they'll say what they think, and that's just whatever.
Now, what do we think happened there? Is this people who saw Big Brother beaten down and said, "Hell no, that's not happening to me"?
I think that's also part of it. I think it's also having older millennial woke wine aunts and cat ladies as their teachers in school, and just rolling their eyes at how silly it was, as this sort of rejection of reality.
Aesop's fables, the wind and the sun, right? The wind and the sun make a bet. Who can get this guy walking in the park to take off his jacket first?
Yeah.
The wind blows and blows and blows, but what that makes the guy do is grab the jacket tighter. The sun then decides to level up. The day gets hotter. The guy takes off the jacket on his own. Those wine odds you're talking about, they're the wind.
That's right.
All their blowing and blowing only made you grab it tighter and say, wait a minute, I don't like this. I need a coat. I'm not going to give up my coat. I need a coat because the wind is so blustery out here.
And so the best advice that we can give anyone is to rehuman yourself, to acclimate yourself to whatever climate you're in.
Yes.
And this doesn't require, and a lot of people, yes, are returning to religion for like real conversion experiences. But what I'm suggesting here is you don't need any ounce of faith, and you can approach this entirely logically this move to rehuman yourself, understanding that you are a human being, a biological phenomenon with the brain and the body. And you might notice how the brain is made for, you could even say, evolved by natural selection and totally random processes. Your brain is evolved for religious experiences.
Right.
So you will feel more fulfilled and happy as a human being participating in religious rituals and activities, even if you don't believe it.
As we
Because it
see from the
will
left,
feel
they
real.
worship too.
That's right.
They worship too. They worship Molech. They worship Bill Thomas, Leah Thomas. They worship whatever talking points put in front of them. I mean, they are more than eager to get on their knees to whatever idol they've built. And if we're not willing to do the same for God, you lose.
Yes. So we don't have a choice about what we don't have a choice whether or not to worship.
It's
We have a
just
choice
what
we can't worship.
Yeah.
So the Western Christian story is, for God so loved the world, and that includes you. Whereas the other one is, let's say if you're a straight white male, you have an oppression in your nature and it cannot be redeemed. Well, which story would you like to participate in, liturgically speaking?
Right.
Well, which is a better story? It doesn't matter if it's true. Which is a better story for
Which
you?
one
personally?
offers you agency and humanity?
Yeah.
Which is that tomorrow doesn't have to be what yesterday is, but I know that what I do today will affect tomorrow.
Yes.
Both are
And
true.
if you even compare, I think the contrast is even more extreme in women, whereas liberal women have the highest instance of diagnosed and meds prescribed for mental illness of any demographic, whereas conservative women are the exact opposite. Happy, fulfilled. So
When
again,
you're not fighting
does it matter
nature,
if it's true?
right.
What's
Right.
going to work for you as a human being?
Yes.
And so it sure seems like we are made to exist in socially conservative, devout, religious, small groups of fewer than 150 people. So this means building real-world friendships, real-world relationships. One of the best places to do that with like-minded people who want the same thing is at church. So if you want to stop unhuman activity, rehuman yourself, and prevent communism in this country, get your ass to church.
Connect to God. Connect to God, because if you don't, you might mess around and think you're God.
And we saw where that went. We saw where that took us.
I mean, if you think about it, America is kind of so we had the Tower of Babel. Men were trying to build, a tower up to heaven for their own glory. God confused their language. And so to me, America is like Pangea. If Pangea were one country. And so all these different types of people were brought together. And we were forced to solve that riddle that we were given at Babel, which is how can people who look different and sound different all coexist? Maybe they don't need to, work on the same construction site, but how can they share a world together? And it can't happen but for the acknowledgement of who made them. That we've seen.
That's right. Yeah, we can build our own little towers, but we need to all follow the same building codes.
Yes.
And if you're going to build something without that disobeys these rules or these laws, we're tearing it down.
Expect those towers to fall. Yeah. By any means necessary. Joshua, we'll get you out of here on this one. You're right that communists play nice as long as necessary, but when it's too late, that's when you see the fangs. When it's too late to fight back, when it's too late to do anything, that's when that villain comes out. How should an anti-communist approach 2025? No doubt the offers of rapprochement that will come. What can we do to defang communism further in these 4 years?
So Tiffany Justice, our mutual, she has pointed out that a real problem that she's witnessed over the last several years is apathy during off-cycle. So that's not presidential election.
Yes.
Nobody cares. That same fire and passion that we brought to this election, just bring 25% of that to your local election in 2025, on election day 2025, election day 2026, election day 2027. That same fire, that same drive, because unhuman activity is not going to stop unless it is stopped. And it's not going to get stopped if you don't show up.
You talked about the 3 approaches to it. You can kind of contain, the 3 approaches to stop one of these revolutions, kind of contain it and let it collapse on its own weight. I'd argue that, so that's what we did with the Soviet Union. I'd argue the same has happened with academia. Very little of what they do matters outside those walls anymore. They've been contained. They don't matter. You need a great man of history. You need a Francisco Franco. You need a Julius Caesar. You need that one guy in Japan who took a samurai sword to the socialist leader, and you ain't heard nothing socialist over there in many decades. But then the third one I thought was the most promising, because 2016 to me was the great man. Regardless of whether you think Trump is great, clearly that's what he was taken to be. 2020, the great man loses to the machine. 2024, you had the man, but you also had the movement. You talked about the 1 million tank men, the reference to the guy at Tiananmen Square. Tim Walz, if you're listening, you remember this. The guy who got ran over when the tanks came to town on Tiananmen Square. How do we become the 1 million tank men?
Yeah, we advise against illegal, unrighteous violence. And
you don't have to get rolled over personally.
But we don't
need
recommend
you to keep listening. So
we don't recommend sacrifice.
Right.
We don't recommend assassination. And I think there's a middle ground of just showing up.
How come we're the only ones who don't, by the way?
Yes.
We're sitting here disavowing this stuff. Name me a liberal podcast willing to do the same.
Yeah, exactly. So I need to wrap it up and finish up with this. But it's going to be that. It's just showing up. Imagine if there were 1 million tank men, not just one. 999,099 more being there present with that guy. Those tanks would not have proceeded if there were that many people. Just you grabbing one of your mates and just showing up at the school board meeting, at election 2025, at your local elections, showing up to campaign, showing up to even run for office, a local office. It may not matter, but yet it may actually might matter. And what we need are great men of history in all levels and in all places.
Absolutely. Joshua Lisec, author of Unhumans, thank you so much for your time, sir. Really appreciate you.
It's been my pleasure, James. Thanks for having me on again.